Sarah Mitchell walked into the Golden Note, the city's most exclusive karaoke lounge, wearing a simple cardigan and jeans. The venue manager, Robert Sterling, took one look at her modest appearance and decided she didn't belong among their elite clientele. He had no idea that the quiet woman before him had graced stages around the world, her voice earning her 3 Grammy Awards and millions of devoted fans. As Robert prepared to humiliate Sarah in front of the wealthy patrons, he never suspected that his arrogant assumptions would soon crumble before everyone's eyes. What happened next would leave the entire room speechless and teach Robert a lesson he'd never forget about judging people by their appearance. Before I continue the story, please subscribe. I need to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can keep bringing you stories like this every day. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you. The Golden Note stood as a monument to excess and exclusivity in the heart of downtown. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering light across marble floors, while velvet-upholstered booths lined the walls beneath oil paintings worth more than most people's homes. Private karaoke rooms featured state-of-the-art sound systems and champagne service, each costing more per hour than many earned in a week. The main lounge buzzed with the quiet conversations of the city's elite. Business moguls clinked glasses of $1,000 whiskey while discussing their latest acquisitions. Politicians shared expensive cigars as they negotiated deals that would shape the city's future. Trophy wives draped in designer gowns laughed at jokes that weren't particularly funny, their diamond jewelry catching the light with every gesture. Membership at the Golden Note required more than money, though the $50,000 initiation fee and monthly dues certainly helped maintain exclusivity. Prospective members needed 3 references from current members, a thorough background check, and approval from the board of directors. The waiting list stretched for years, filled with names of people desperate to join this inner circle of power and influence. The dress code was strictly enforced. Men wore tailored suits that cost more than luxury cars, their ties silk and their shoes handcrafted Italian leather. Women donned couture gowns and carried purses that required waiting lists of their own. Everything about the Golden Note screamed sophistication and status, from the imported marble bar to the servers who moved with practiced elegance through the room. The venue's reputation was built on discretion and prestige. Deals worth millions were struck over private karaoke sessions, while celebrities and politicians mingled away from prying eyes. The Golden Note wasn't just a place to sing. It was a sanctuary for those who shaped the world, a place where influence was currency and appearances meant everything. Tonight, like every night, the lounge was filled with the sounds of power and privilege. Conversations flowed in hushed tones about stock options and real estate ventures, while the soft melodies from private rooms provided an elegant backdrop. The atmosphere was thick with self-importance and the unspoken understanding that everyone present had earned their place through wealth, connections, or both. This was the world that Sarah Mitchell was about to enter, a world where her simple cardigan and jeans would mark her as an outsider from the moment she stepped through the door. Sarah Mitchell paused at the entrance of the Golden Note, taking a moment to adjust the strap of her simple canvas bag. Her soft gray cardigan hung loosely over a plain white t-shirt, and her well-worn jeans spoke of comfort over fashion. Her brown hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail, free of the elaborate styling that adorned every other woman in the room. She wore no jewelry except for a small silver watch, its face scratched from years of use. Despite her understated appearance, Sarah moved with a quiet confidence that came from within. Her posture was straight, her steps measured and purposeful. There was something in the way she carried herself that suggested depths beneath the surface, though few people ever looked closely enough to notice. Her eyes, a warm hazel, took in every detail of the opulent surroundings with the practiced observation of someone accustomed to reading rooms and people. As she stood in the doorway, Sarah observed the glittering spectacle before her. She noticed how the wealthy patrons held their champagne flutes, how they tilted their heads when they laughed, how their conversations seemed to dance around topics of importance without ever quite landing on substance. She saw the way the servers moved with choreographed precision, anticipating needs before they were voiced. Sarah had been in many such establishments over the years, though always as a performer rather than a patron. She understood the unspoken rules of these spaces, the careful hierarchy of wealth and influence that governed every interaction. She knew that her appearance would mark her as different, as someone who didn't belong in this rarefied atmosphere. Yet she felt no intimidation, no desire to apologize for her presence. Sarah had learned long ago that true worth wasn't measured by the price of one's clothing or the size of one's bank account. She had seen behind the curtains of fame and fortune, knew that beneath the designer gowns and perfect smiles often lay insecurity and emptiness. As she moved further into the lounge, Sarah's calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the nervous energy that seemed to pulse through the room. While others fidgeted with expensive accessories or checked their reflections in mirrored surfaces, she simply breathed steadily and prepared herself for whatever lay ahead. Her quiet dignity was like a shield, protecting her from the judgment she knew was coming. The reservation was in her name, and she had every right to be here, regardless of what anyone might think about her appearance. Robert Sterling straightened his burgundy silk tie as he surveyed his domain from behind the polished mahogany reception desk. His charcoal gray suit was immaculately tailored, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Italian leather shoes gleamed beneath perfectly pressed trousers, and his gold cufflinks caught the chandelier's glow as he adjusted his jacket. Every detail of his appearance was calculated to project authority and sophistication. At 42, Robert had cultivated an image of refined superiority that he wore like armor. His salt and pepper hair was styled with precision, not a strand out of place. His clean-shaven jaw was set in a perpetual expression of mild disdain, as if the world around him consistently failed to meet his exacting standards. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his pale blue eyes held the cold calculation of a man who believed himself the final arbiter of worthiness. Robert prided himself on being the Golden Note's guardian of exclusivity. He saw his role as far more than simple management. He was a curator of class, a protector of prestige. In his mind, he possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify who belonged in this rarefied atmosphere and who did not. He could spot an imposter from across the room, could sense when someone was trying to punch above their social weight class. For 15 years, Robert had perfected the art of the dismissive glance. The cutting remark disguised as helpful suggestion. He took genuine pleasure in protecting his wealthy clientele from the intrusion of lesser individuals who might somehow contaminate the exclusive atmosphere. His methods were always professional, always plausibly deniable, but devastatingly effective. The regulars appreciated his vigilance. They nodded approvingly when he quietly escorted out someone who had clearly wandered into the wrong establishment. They complimented him on maintaining the venue's reputation, on ensuring that the Golden Note remained a sanctuary for people of their caliber. Robert's greatest fear was that someone unworthy might slip past his careful screening, might somehow gain access to this inner sanctum of power and influence. He had built his entire identity around his ability to recognize quality, to separate the wheat from the chaff. His reputation depended on his unfailing judgment of character and status. As he stood watching the evening's patrons enjoy their exclusive entertainment, Robert felt the familiar satisfaction of a job well done. Every person in the room had been personally approved by him, had met his rigorous standards for admission. This was his kingdom, and he ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. Robert's eyes locked onto Sarah the moment she entered the main lounge. His practiced gaze swept over her simple attire with the precision of a customs inspector examining suspicious cargo. The worn denim, the unremarkable cardigan, the complete absence of designer labels, nain wishu. Everything about her appearance screamed middle class at best. He felt his jaw tighten as he watched her move deeper into his carefully curated sanctuary. With the fluid motion of a predator approaching prey, Robert glided across the marble floor toward the intruder. His expensive shoes clicked against the stone with measured authority, announcing his approach to anyone within earshot. Several regular patrons glanced up from their conversations, recognizing the familiar sight of their guardian preparing to maintain order. "Excuse me, miss." Robert's voice carried the practiced politeness of customer service, layered over unmistakable condescension. He positioned himself directly in Sarah's path, forcing her to stop. "I believe you may be lost. This is the Golden Note, a private membership establishment." Sarah looked up at him with calm hazel eyes, showing no trace of the embarrassment or intimidation he expected. "I'm not lost. Thank you. I have a reservation for this evening. Robert's thin smile never wavered, but his eyes narrowed slightly behind his wire-rimmed glasses. A reservation? He allowed just enough skepticism to creep into his tone to make his doubt clear. I'm afraid there may be some confusion. Our reservations are exclusively for members and their invited guests. Are you perhaps looking for Murphy's Pub down the street? They have karaoke on Thursday nights. Very accessible. The pause before the word accessible hung in the air like a blade, sharp with implication. Sarah remained perfectly still, her breathing steady and controlled. She had encountered this type of person countless times throughout her career. Gatekeepers who believed themselves qualified to judge her worth based on surface appearances. There's no confusion, Sarah replied evenly, her voice carrying quiet strength. My reservation is under Sarah Mitchell, party of one. For 8 o'clock, Robert's expression shifted to one of barely concealed irritation. This woman clearly didn't understand the delicate hint he had offered her. She was forcing him to be more direct, to spell out what should have been obvious to anyone with proper social awareness. He straightened his tie once more, preparing to escalate his approach while maintaining his veneer of professional courtesy. Miss Mitchell, he said, drawing out her name as if tasting something unpleasant. I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of our establishment. Sarah met Robert's condescending gaze with unwavering composure. Her hands remained clasped loosely in front of her, her posture straight but relaxed. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard, even if people weren't always ready to listen. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling, she said, reading his name from the gold nameplate pinned to his lapel. I called yesterday and made a reservation for this evening. I'm fully prepared to pay whatever fees are required for tonight's visit. Robert's eyebrows arched in theatrical surprise. The idea that this plainly dressed woman could afford even a single drink at the Golden Note struck him as absurd. He had seen her type before, people who wandered in off the street, drawn by curiosity or misplaced confidence, only to flee in embarrassment when confronted with the reality of their financial limitations. Miss Mitchell, he said, his tone growing sharper despite his attempt to maintain professional courtesy. I'm not sure you understand what prepared to pay means in an establishment of this caliber. Our cover charge alone is $500 per person. That's before you order a single beverage or reserve a private room. Sarah nodded calmly. I understand completely. $500 for admission, plus service charges and gratuities. I've done my research. Robert felt a flush of irritation creep up his neck. This woman's persistence was becoming genuinely annoying. She was forcing him to waste valuable time that could be better spent attending to his actual clientele. He glanced around the room, noting that several patrons had begun to take notice of the exchange. Research, he repeated with a thin laugh. Miss Mitchell, with all due respect, this isn't the sort of place one simply researches and visits. Our membership is carefully curated. We cater to a very specific clientele. Business leaders, celebrities, political figures, people of substantial means and social standing. He paused, allowing his words to sink in before delivering what he considered the killing blow. Perhaps you're thinking of Golden Note's karaoke on 5th Street? It's much more budget-friendly. I'm sure you'd find it more suitable to your circumstances. But I'm all budget-friendly. I'm sure you'd find it more suitable to your circumstances. Sarah's expression never changed. She simply reached into her canvas bag and withdrew a credit card, holding it between 2 fingers like a calling card. The gesture was so matter-of-fact, so confident, that for a moment Robert felt a flicker of uncertainty. Shall we settle the admission fee now, or would you prefer to check your reservation system first? The tension between Robert and Sarah had not gone unnoticed. From a nearby booth upholstered in midnight blue velvet, Victoria Ashworth lowered her champagne flute and leaned toward her dinner companion with predatory interest. Her diamond earrings caught the light as she whispered behind a manicured hand. Charles, look at this little drama unfolding, she murmured to her husband, a real estate mogul whose net worth was exceeded only by his sense of superiority. Some poor creature has wandered in off the street thinking she belongs here. Charles Ashworth adjusted his platinum watch and smirked. Probably saw it in some travel magazine and thought she'd treat herself to a night with the grown-ups. Robert will sort her out quickly enough. At the bar, Marcus Webb, a tech entrepreneur whose recent IPO had made headlines, swiveled on his leather stool to get a better view. His Armani suit probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and he wore his wealth like a weapon. 500 says she bolts within the next 2 minutes, he announced to his companions with cruel amusement. You're on, laughed Patricia Monroe, an art gallery owner whose client list read like a who's who of cultural elite. Though I give her credit for persistence, most people would have slunk away by now. Their whispered commentary created a bubble of voyeuristic entertainment around the unfolding confrontation. Several other patrons had subtly turned in their seats, pretending to examine their phones while actually watching the show. The atmosphere grew thick with anticipation, like spectators at a gladiatorial match. However, not everyone in the room shared the same callous amusement. Emma Rodriguez, a 23-year-old server working her way through graduate school, approached the scene with growing concern. Unlike the establishment's wealthy clientele, Emma had grown up in a household where dignity wasn't measured by designer labels or bank account balances. Her uniform was immaculate, her service impeccable. But her heart remained unaffected by the toxic atmosphere of judgment that permeated the Golden Note. She had watched Robert humiliate people before, had seen the cruel entertainment the patrons derived from these encounters, and it never failed to turn her stomach. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, appearing at Sarah's elbow with a warm smile. "Would you like me to take your coat while Mr. Sterling checks the reservation system?" The simple gesture of basic courtesy cut through the tension like a knife. Emma's genuine kindness stood in stark contrast to the cold calculation surrounding them, offering Sarah a moment of human decency in an increasingly hostile environment. Robert's patience, already stretched thin, finally snapped. The quiet murmurs and expectant stares from his valued clientele reminded him that he had an audience to perform for, a reputation to maintain. He could not allow this woman to continue challenging his authority in front of the very people whose respect he had spent years cultivating. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice rising loud enough to carry across the immediate area. "I think we need to address this situation directly." He straightened to his full height, using his physical presence to intimidate. "The Golden Note requires a $500 admission fee plus a minimum spending requirement of $1,500 per evening. That's $2,000 before you've even ordered an appetizer." The nearby conversations fell silent as patrons turned their full attention to the unfolding spectacle. Robert felt emboldened by their interest, feeding off their anticipation like a performer on stage. "Now, I'm not trying to embarrass you," he continued, though his tone suggested the opposite. "But I have a responsibility to be honest about what we're dealing with here. This establishment caters to CEOs, entertainment industry executives, political leaders, people who consider $2,000 pocket change." He gestured broadly at the opulent surroundings, his voice taking on the quality of a professor lecturing a particularly slow student. "Perhaps you've confused us with one of the more accessible venues downtown. There are several establishments that would be much more appropriate for people in your circumstances." Victoria Ashworth let out a barely suppressed giggle from her booth, while Marcus Webb leaned forward with obvious relish. The cruel entertainment was exactly what they had hoped for. A chance to feel superior by watching someone else's humiliation. "People like me?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice cutting through Robert's theatrical display with surprising sharpness. "Well, yes," Robert replied with feigned regret, spreading his hands as if the situation were beyond his control. "People who are more comfortable with modest establishments. There's no shame in knowing your place in the world, Miss Mitchell. In fact, it shows wisdom and self-awareness." Emma stepped closer, her face flushed with anger at Robert's cruelty. She had witnessed enough of his condescending performances to recognize the calculated nature of his humiliation tactics. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her serving tray, torn between her need for the job and her desire to defend this quiet woman who had done nothing wrong. The room held its collective breath, waiting to see how this fascinating drama would unfold. The whispers began as a soft hiss, spreading through the lounge like wildfire through dry grass. Victoria Ashworth no longer bothered to lower her voice as she shared her commentary with anyone within earshot. "Can you imagine the audacity?" she proclaimed with theatrical indignation, walking into the Golden Note dressed like she's going to the grocery store. "Some people simply have no sense of propriety." Charles nodded sagely, swirling his 20-year-old scotch. "It's what happens when standards slip, Victoria. Let one of them in, and suddenly they all think they belong here." Marcus Webb had abandoned all pretense of discretion, openly filming the confrontation with his phone while providing running commentary to his companions. "This is priceless. Wait until you see how this ends." Robert's about to deliver the final blow. Nervous laughter rippled through the nearby tables as other patrons caught snippets of the exchange. Some covered their mouths with manicured hands, their eyes bright with cruel amusement. Others shook their heads in exaggerated sympathy, as if witnessing a tragic misunderstanding rather than participating in a coordinated act of social humiliation. Robert basked in the attention, feeling the familiar rush of power that came from being the center of such focused interest. With deliberate ceremony, he moved to the reception desk and made a great show of consulting his tablet. His fingers tapped the screen with theatrical precision while his audience waited in anticipation. "Let me check our reservation system thoroughly," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. He frowned at the screen, scrolled up and down multiple times, and even refreshed the page with exaggerated confusion. "Mitchell, you said? Sarah Mitchell for 8 o'clock?" The silence stretched like a taut wire as Robert continued his performance. He typed the name again, checked alternate spellings, even pretended to search their cancellation log. Finally, he looked up with an expression of carefully crafted regret mixed with vindication. "I'm terribly sorry, Miss Mitchell, but there is absolutely no reservation in our system under that name. Not for tonight, not for any night this week." He spread his hands in a gesture of helpless finality. "It appears there's been some sort of miscommunication." The patrons exchanged knowing glances, their expressions a mixture of satisfaction and secondhand embarrassment. Patricia Monroe actually applauded softly, as if Robert had just delivered a particularly clever line in a play. Emma watched Sarah's face carefully, expecting to see the devastation that usually followed Robert's systematic demolition of someone's dignity. Instead, she saw something else entirely. A calm resolve that seemed to deepen rather than crack under pressure. Sarah stood perfectly still as the laughter and whispers swirled around her like a toxic fog. Her breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, as if Robert's theatrical revelation had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. The cruel entertainment of the wealthy patrons seemed to bounce off her like rain against a window. When she finally spoke, her voice carried across the now quiet lounge with crystalline clarity. "I see there seems to be some confusion with your system. Perhaps I could speak with the owner to resolve this matter?" Robert's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to outright incredulity. The audacity of this woman was beyond comprehension. Even after being publicly exposed as someone who clearly didn't belong, she continued to push forward with her absurd charade. "The owner?" Robert repeated, his voice dripping with disbelief. He let out a short, sharp laugh that was echoed by several patrons. "Miss Mitchell, I'm afraid you don't understand how establishments like this operate. Our owner, Marcus Chen, doesn't deal with walk-in customers or reservation disputes." He straightened his tie once more, a gesture that had become his signature move when asserting dominance. "Mr. Chen only meets with people of significant importance, Fortune 500 CEOs, A-list celebrities, political figures who shape policy. He's currently hosting a private dinner with the mayor and 3 city council members." Victoria Ashworth leaned forward in her booth, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Honestly, the presumption. Next, she'll be asking to speak with the president." The laughter that followed was louder this time, more confident. The patrons had moved beyond mere observation to active participation in the spectacle. They felt safe in their cruelty, protected by their wealth and status, united in their judgment of this clearly delusional woman. Emma felt her hands clench involuntarily around her serving tray. She had seen Robert humiliate people before. But something about Sarah's quiet dignity in the face of such systematic cruelty made this particular performance feel especially vicious. The woman hadn't raised her voice, hadn't become defensive or angry. She simply stood there, absorbing their collective disdain with an almost supernatural composure. "Mr. Chen values his privacy and his time," Robert continued, warming to his theme. "He trusts me to handle situations like this appropriately, without troubling him with every person who wanders in off the street with unrealistic expectations." Sarah nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. Her calm acceptance seemed to unnerve Robert slightly, though he couldn't quite identify why. Robert's eyes glittered with malicious inspiration as a new idea formed in his mind. The woman's persistence was becoming genuinely irritating, but perhaps he could turn this entire situation into an even more entertaining spectacle for his valued clientele. After all, the Golden Note was, at its heart, a karaoke establishment. "You know what, Miss Mitchell?" Robert said, his voice taking on a tone of false generosity. "I'm feeling charitable tonight. Perhaps we can resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone." He gestured grandly toward the main stage, where a professional sound system worth more than most people's cars gleamed under spotlights. "Since you're so determined to experience the Golden Note, why don't you prove you belong here? Show us what you can do." The suggestion sent a ripple of anticipation through the watching crowd. Marcus Webb actually rubbed his hands together with glee, while Victoria Ashworth sat forward in her booth with predatory interest. This was better than they had hoped for, not just a rejection, but a public performance of failure. "I'll give you one song," Robert continued, his voice growing louder as he played to his audience. "One chance to demonstrate that you have something to offer our discerning clientele. If you can impress this room, perhaps we can overlook the irregularities with your reservation." Emma felt her stomach clench with dread. She had seen Robert orchestrate these kinds of humiliations before, always with the same cruel precision. He never offered challenges he didn't know the victim would fail. Robert moved to the karaoke system with theatrical ceremony, scrolling through the extensive song library with deliberate slowness. "Let's see, what would be appropriate for someone of your obvious talents?" His finger paused over several entries before settling on his choice with obvious satisfaction. "Ah, perfect. I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston. One of the most challenging vocal performances in popular music. Surely someone who believes they belong at the Golden Note can handle a little Whitney?" The crowd murmured with appreciation for Robert's selection. The song was notoriously difficult, requiring extraordinary vocal range and control. Professional singers regularly failed to do justice to Whitney Houston's masterpiece. For an amateur to attempt it was social suicide. Charles Ashworth raised his scotch in a mock toast. "Brilliant choice, Robert. This should be thoroughly entertaining." Patricia Monroe was already recording with her phone. "I simply must capture this for posterity. My gallery friends will never believe it." Robert handed Sarah the wireless microphone with exaggerated courtesy, his smile sharp as a blade. "The stage is yours, Miss Mitchell. Let's see what you're really made of." The atmosphere in the Golden Note transformed from casual observation to active blood sport, as the wealthy patrons realized they were about to witness what promised to be a spectacular public failure. The anticipation was palpable, crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Marcus Webb stood up from his barstool, raising his crystal tumbler high above his head. "Ladies and gentlemen, I propose we make this interesting. I'll wager $1,000 that our aspiring performer doesn't make it past the first chorus without cracking." "1,000?" Victoria Ashworth laughed, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dismissively. "That's insulting to Whitney's memory. I'll put down 5,000 that she doesn't hit a single high note correctly." Charles Ashworth pulled out his phone, apparently accessing his betting app. 10,000 says she stops mid-song out of pure embarrassment. Any takers? The cruel wagering spread like a contagion through the room. Patrons who moments before had been engaged in their own conversations now turned their full attention to the spectacle, pulling out phones and calling out increasingly elaborate bets on Sarah's impending humiliation. 20 says she doesn't even start singing, just runs away, called out a tech executive from across the room. 50 that she attempts it but sounds like a dying cat, added a real estate heiress. Her friends erupting in delighted laughter. Robert basked in the electric atmosphere he had created, feeling like a conductor orchestrating a symphony of cruelty. This was better than simply ejecting the woman. This was art. He moved to the small stage area and tapped the microphone for attention, his voice booming through the professional sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members and guests of the Golden Note." He began with the flourish of a carnival barker. "It appears we have some unexpected entertainment this evening. Please direct your attention to the stage, where Miss Sarah Mitchell will be attempting one of the most challenging vocal performances in modern music." He paused for dramatic effect, allowing the anticipatory murmurs to build. "I present to you tonight's special performer. Let's see if she can live up to the standards we've come to expect at the Golden Note." The emphasis on special performer dripped with sarcasm, drawing another round of laughter from the audience. Emma watched from the sidelines, her face burning with shame for the establishment she worked for. She had never seen Robert be quite this cruel, quite this theatrical in his destruction of someone's dignity. Sarah stood quietly near the stage, still holding the microphone, seemingly oblivious to the betting frenzy swirling around her. Her calm demeanor only seemed to fuel the crowd's anticipation of her inevitable breakdown. Sarah stepped onto the small stage with the same quiet grace she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. Her worn sneakers made no sound against the polished hardwood as she approached the professional microphone stand. The spotlights, designed to make performers feel like stars, cast her simple cardigan and jeans in stark relief against the opulent backdrop. The crowd's laughter reached a crescendo as she adjusted the microphone height with steady hands. Someone in the back called out, "Don't forget to breathe," which sent another wave of cruel amusement rippling through the room. Victoria Ashworth was practically vibrating with anticipation. Her phone held high to capture what she was certain would be a moment of pure social media gold. "This is going to be better than that reality show where they make people sing for money," Patricia Monroe whispered loudly to her companion, not bothering to hide her excitement. Robert stood off to the side, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who had just delivered the perfect checkmate. He had orchestrated this entire scenario with the precision of a master strategist. And now he was about to reap the rewards of his careful planning. The woman's humiliation would be complete, absolute, and very public. But something about Sarah's demeanor began to create an almost imperceptible shift in the room's energy. While the laughter continued, a few of the more observant patrons noticed that she showed no signs of the nervous energy they expected. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't fidgeting with her clothes or looking around desperately for an escape route. Sarah closed her eyes and took a single, deep breath. The simple gesture was so controlled, so centered, that it cut through the noise like a knife. For just a moment, the mocking laughter faltered as something indefinable passed through the room. She opened her eyes and looked out at the sea of expectant faces, her gaze steady and unflinching. There was no fear there, no desperation, no plea for mercy. Instead, there was something that looked almost like preparation. The backing track for Whitney Houston's iconic ballad began to play through the crystal-clear sound system, its opening notes filling the sudden quiet that had descended over the room. Sarah stood perfectly still, microphone in hand, waiting for her cue with the patience of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The moment stretched like a held breath, pregnant with possibility. The first note that emerged from Sarah's lips cut through the air like a blade forged from pure sound. It was rich, full, and perfectly controlled, carrying a depth and warmth that seemed to vibrate in the very bones of everyone present. The mocking laughter died instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch and drained all the cruelty from the room in a single moment. Victoria Ashworth's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips, her mouth falling open in shock. Marcus Webb's phone slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the marble floor unnoticed. The betting and cruel commentary evaporated like mist before the sun, as Sarah's voice soared through the opening phrases with effortless precision. This wasn't karaoke. This was artistry. Sarah's voice possessed the kind of technical mastery that took decades to develop, the sort of control and power that separated true professionals from talented amateurs. Each note was placed with surgical precision, yet flowed with an emotional authenticity that made the hair on the back of necks stand up throughout the room. Robert's face drained of color as the reality of what he was witnessing began to penetrate his shock. This woman, this plainly dressed woman he had spent the evening humiliating, was singing with a level of skill that belonged on the world's greatest stages. Her voice filled every corner of the opulent lounge with such clarity and power that the expensive sound system seemed almost unnecessary. Emma found herself holding her breath, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes as Sarah's voice climbed through the song's challenging passages without the slightest strain or effort. It was like watching a master painter create a masterpiece with casual brushstrokes, making the impossible look effortless. The wealthy patrons sat frozen in their seats, their cruel anticipation transformed into something approaching awe. Some had unconsciously leaned forward, drawn by the magnetic power of Sarah's performance. Others sat back in their chairs as if physically struck by the unexpected beauty filling their exclusive sanctuary. Charles Ashworth's expensive scotch sat forgotten on the table before him as he stared at the stage with the expression of a man whose entire worldview was being systematically dismantled by the evidence of his own ears. The transformation was complete and undeniable. In the span of mere moments, Sarah had shifted from victim to master, from outsider to the most commanding presence in the room. As Sarah's voice soared through the song's most challenging passages, a strange phenomenon began to ripple through the crowd. What had started as stunned silence slowly transformed into something else entirely. The uncomfortable stirring of recognition. Marcus Webb squinted at the stage, his tech entrepreneur's mind racing as he tried to place the familiar timbre of Sarah's voice. There was something hauntingly recognizable about the way she shaped each phrase, the particular quality of her vibrato that tugged at the edges of his memory. "Wait a minute," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over Sarah's soaring performance. That voice. I know that voice. Near the bar, an entertainment industry executive named David Park nearly choked on his martini as realization struck him like a physical blow. He had attended the Grammy Awards for the past 7 years, had sat in the audience, and heard this exact voice fill the Staples Center with its extraordinary power and emotion. Patricia Monroe's hand flew to her throat as her own recognition dawned. She had attended exclusive charity galas, where this voice had moved audiences to tears, had purchased albums that had gone multi-platinum. Her face went ashen as the pieces began falling into place. Sarah continued singing, her voice building in intensity and emotional depth as she approached the song's climactic moments. Each note was delivered with the kind of masterful control that only came from years of professional training and countless hours on the world's biggest stages. This wasn't just exceptional talent. This was legendary skill being displayed in their small, exclusive venue. Victoria Ashworth grabbed her husband's arm with trembling fingers. "Charles," she hissed urgently, her voice shaking with dawning horror. "Charles, I think I know who that is." The whispers began as a barely audible undercurrent, patrons leaning toward each other with wide eyes and pale faces. Phones that had been raised to record a humiliating failure were now trembling in uncertain hands as their owners grappled with the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Robert stood frozen at the side of the stage, his confident smirk replaced by an expression of growing panic. Something was happening in his carefully controlled domain, something beyond his understanding or ability to manage. The woman he had systematically humiliated was not just singing, she was commanding the room with the authority of someone accustomed to audiences far larger and more important than this collection of local elite. Sarah's voice reached the song's emotional peak, filling every corner of the golden note with such beauty and power that several patrons found themselves wiping away unexpected tears. David Park suddenly bolted upright from his bar stool, his martini glass crashing to the floor and shattering into crystal fragments. His face had gone completely white as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. "Oh my God," he breathed, his voice cutting through Sarah's performance like a knife. "That's Sarah Mitchell. That's the Sarah Mitchell." The name hit the room like a shock wave. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze halfway to lips. Every eye in the golden note turned from David to the woman on stage, then back again as the impossible reality began to sink in. The Grammy winner? Victoria Ashworth's voice cracked with horror. The Sarah Mitchell who won 3 Grammys last year? The one who sold out Madison Square Garden in 12 minutes? Record of the year? Album of the year? Marcus Webb whispered, his face pale as death. She's worth $40 million. She's performed for presidents and royalty. The murmurs spread like wildfire through the lounge, growing in volume and intensity as the full magnitude of the situation became clear. Phones appeared as patrons frantically searched for images, confirming what their ears had already told them. Sarah's face, usually seen in glamorous red carpet photos and professional headshots, stared back at them from their screens. She performed at the Royal Albert Hall last month, Patricia Monroe said faintly, her hand pressed to her chest. The Queen attended. The Queen of England went to hear her sing. Charles Ashworth's expensive Scotch sat forgotten as he stared at the stage in complete shock. We've been watching one of the most famous singers in the world get humiliated by our venue manager. Robert Sterling felt the blood drain from his face as the whispers reached his ears. His legs suddenly felt unsteady beneath him, and he gripped the edge of a nearby table for support. The woman he had systematically humiliated, the person he had dismissed as unworthy of breathing the same air as his clientele, was one of the most celebrated artists in the world. Emma covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face as she watched Sarah continue her flawless performance, seemingly oblivious to the chaos of recognition swirling around her. The quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal now took on an entirely different meaning. Sarah's voice soared toward the song's final, impossible high notes. Each one delivered with the effortless mastery that had made her a household name across the globe. The color drained from Robert Sterling's face so rapidly it was as if someone had opened a valve and let all the blood flow out at once. His hands began to tremble uncontrollably as the full weight of his catastrophic mistake crashed down upon him like an avalanche of professional destruction. Sarah Mitchell, 3-time Grammy winner. The woman whose albums had topped charts in 47 countries. The artist who commanded millions of dollars per performance, whose voice had graced the most prestigious stages on earth, and he had spent the entire evening systematically humiliating her in front of his most influential clientele. Robert's knees buckled slightly, and he had to grip the edge of a nearby table to remain standing. His expensive suit suddenly felt like a costume, his carefully cultivated authority nothing more than a house of cards collapsing in slow motion. The whispers around him grew louder, more urgent, as patrons began to grasp the enormity of what they had all witnessed. "This can't be happening," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over Sarah's continuing performance. "This cannot be happening." His mind raced through the implications with the speed of a man watching his entire life's work disappear before his eyes. Marcus Chen, the owner, would be furious beyond description. The Golden Note's reputation, built over decades of exclusive service, was now hanging by a thread. Word of this incident would spread through the city's elite circles within hours. Robert's carefully constructed image as the guardian of standards had been shattered in the most public way possible. He had failed at the one thing he prided himself on most, his ability to recognize quality and importance. Instead, he had revealed himself to be nothing more than a shallow judge of appearances, a man who mistook designer labels for worth and expensive jewelry for value. The worst part was that it had all been recorded. Multiple phones had captured his condescending performance, his theatrical dismissal of one of the world's most celebrated artists. By tomorrow morning, his humiliation of Sarah Mitchell would likely be trending on social media platforms around the globe. Sweat beaded on Robert's forehead despite the lounge's perfect climate control. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. The prestigious position he had spent 15 years building lay in ruins around his perfectly polished Italian leather shoes. As Sarah's voice reached new heights of beauty and power, Robert Sterling stood in the shadows, watching his entire world crumble note by perfect note. The private dining room doors burst open with such force that they slammed against the walls, causing several patrons to jump in their seats. Marcus Chen strode into the main lounge with the purposeful intensity of a man who had just received deeply disturbing news. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of hasty departure from his dinner, his tie slightly askew, his jacket unbuttoned. Marcus had built the Golden Note from nothing, transforming it into the city's most exclusive entertainment destination through decades of meticulous attention to detail and personal service. At 55, he commanded respect throughout the industry, known for his integrity and his genuine care for both his staff and his guests. The moment he entered the room, Marcus's eyes found Sarah on the stage, her voice filling the space with its extraordinary beauty. His expression shifted from curiosity to confusion, then to dawning horror as he took in the scene before him. The betting slips scattered on tables, the phones recording what should have been a private moment, the cruel anticipation on his patrons' faces that was only now transforming into shame. What in God's name is happening here? Marcus's voice cut through the lounge like a whip crack, causing Sarah's performance to pause momentarily as she recognized his voice. Emma rushed to his side, her face streaked with tears. "Mr. Chen. Mr. Sterling, he made Miss Mitchell perform to prove she belonged here. He said she couldn't afford to be here, that she didn't have a reservation." Marcus's face went through a spectrum of emotions, disbelief, rage, and finally a cold fury that made even the wealthy patrons shrink back in their seats. His friendship with Sarah Mitchell went back 15 years to when she was still a struggling artist playing small venues. He had been one of the first to recognize her talent, had supported her career from the beginning. "Sarah!" Marcus called out, his voice filled with genuine anguish. "My dear friend, what has been done to you?" Sarah lowered the microphone, her performance complete, and smiled at Marcus with the same gentle warmth she had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "Hello, Marcus. It's good to see you." Robert Sterling stood frozen in absolute terror as Marcus Chen's gaze finally found him across the room. The owner's expression promised consequences that would extend far beyond simple termination. This was personal now, a violation of friendship and trust that cut deeper than any professional failure. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break. Robert Sterling stumbled forward like a man walking to his execution, his hands shaking so violently he could barely control them. The confident, condescending manager who had orchestrated Sarah's public humiliation was gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified man whose entire world was collapsing around him. "Mr. Chen, please, you have to understand." Robert's voice cracked as he approached his employer. "I had no idea who she was. She looked so ordinary, so I was just protecting the establishment's reputation. I was doing my job." Marcus Chen's expression remained glacial as he listened to Robert's pathetic justification. The owner's jaw was set in a hard line, his eyes blazing with a fury that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. "Your job?" Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your job was to treat every guest with respect and dignity. Your job was to uphold the values that this establishment was built upon. Instead, you turned my venue into a circus of cruelty." Robert fell to his knees in front of his employer, his expensive suit crumpling as desperation overwhelmed his last shreds of dignity. "Please, Mr. Chen, I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll take sensitivity training. I'll work for free. Just please don't fire me. This job is my entire life." "Get up," Marcus commanded coldly. "You're embarrassing yourself and this establishment further." The owner turned to address the room, his voice carrying to every corner of the lounge. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make something crystal clear. What you witnessed tonight is the antithesis of everything the Golden Note stands for. We built our reputation on treating every guest with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status." He gestured toward Robert, who had shakily risen to his feet. "Mr. Sterling's employment with the Golden Note is terminated, effective immediately. He will be escorted from the premises and will not be welcome to return." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several patrons who had participated in the cruel betting looked away in shame, while others fumbled to delete the recordings on their phones. Sarah stepped down from the stage with the same quiet grace she had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Marcus, that's not necessary," she said gently. "Everyone makes mistakes. Perhaps this could be a learning opportunity instead. Her words stunned everyone present. After being systematically humiliated, publicly mocked, and treated with unconscionable cruelty, Sarah Mitchell was advocating for mercy for the man who had orchestrated her torment. Marcus looked at his friend with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. "Sarah, your compassion is remarkable, but some actions have consequences that can't be undone." 6 months later, Robert Sterling stood in the kitchen of St. Mary's Community Center, ladling soup into bowls for the evening's dinner service. His expensive suits had been replaced by simple volunteer clothing, his manicured appearance now showing the honest wear of someone who worked with his hands to help others. The court-mandated community service had begun as punishment, but somewhere along the way, it had become something else entirely. Working alongside people from all walks of life, Robert had slowly learned to see beyond appearances and recognize the dignity inherent in every human being. The homeless veterans he served had taught him about courage. The struggling single mothers had shown him strength. The elderly volunteers had demonstrated wisdom that no amount of money could buy. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," said Maria, an elderly woman whose weathered hands spoke of decades of hard work. "You're an angel for doing this." Robert smiled genuinely for the first time in months. "Thank you, Maria. That means more to me than you know." That same evening, the Golden Note hosted its most prestigious event of the year. Sarah Mitchell took the stage as the headline performer, her presence transforming the venue into something magical. The same room that had witnessed her humiliation now celebrated her artistry with the reverence it deserved. Marcus Chen watched from the wings as Sarah's voice filled every corner of the lounge, her performance earning a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. The wealthy patrons who had once mocked her now hung on every note, many of them moved to tears by the beauty of her gift. After her performance, Sarah joined Marcus at a private table overlooking the main floor. "You know," she said softly, "I received a letter from Robert last week. He's volunteering at a community center, working with people who have far less than he ever did. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most painful experiences." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps that's true for all of us. Your grace that night changed more than just Robert's life. Half my regular clientele have started volunteering themselves." Sarah smiled, watching the elegant crowd below. "Maybe that's the real lesson here. True worth isn't measured by the clothes we wear or the money we have. It's measured by how we treat each other, especially when we think no one important is watching." The truth of her words resonated through the Golden Note, a reminder that dignity, respect, and kindness should never be luxuries reserved only for those who appear to deserve them.